Hi everyone, my name's Dan and I'm the site pastor for Kerith on the Isle of Wight, and it's great to be with you today to continue our series, God's Guide to Getting Along. In this series we're exploring how we can love each other well and how we can grow in our love for each other. And this is such an important message and series. I'm really excited to be sharing with you today about how we can grow in our listening of each other. Because I think listening is really important, isn't it? And it's one of those ways that we can show each other that we really care when we listen well. You see, although you might not necessarily realize it when you're listened to well, I know that when you're not listened to well, it is really obvious and can sometimes be a bit hard and a bit frustrating. When we don't listen well to others, we don't hear what's really going on, and then we can leave people feeling unheard and even unloved. And we live in such a noisy and distracted world, don't we? There's always so much going on, something trying to grab our attention. You might find that deep listening or really good listening is quite rare. I think one of the dangerous habits that many of us slip into is that we listen to people in order to respond to them rather than to understand. I know for me, I'm constantly doing this. When I'm listening to people, I'm trying to think of how I can respond to what they're saying, trying to think of something clever to maybe help them or try and fix their situation or whatever it is. And actually, I know that sometimes I just need to slow down and just listen to show that I care and actually just listen to understand what's going on with them. I don't know if this is the case for you, but I know many people really carry wounds from just being interrupted or advised too quickly or too rashly about things that they really don't want any advice on, or sometimes just being misunderstood. There's so many times in our lives in different relationships, whether it's friends or siblings or partners or parents or whatever it is, or work colleagues maybe, teachers even, where we actually just need them to listen well rather than jumping in and giving us their piece of advice or their thoughts on whatever it is that's going on. Poor listening can sometimes break down that connection that we really all long for. And today we're looking at a story in the Bible of a guy called Job and his three friends who were not very good at listening. And the book of Job is a bit of a tricky one. It's in the Old Testament, so the part of the Bible before Jesus was around. It's set in a far off land called Uz, which we don't hear very much about. And there's not any characters in this story who are Israelites, which is like the main group of people in the Bible. God's chosen people. None of them appear. So it's a bit random. It can seem a bit strange. It talks a lot about suffering, and especially when bad things happen to good people, but it doesn't really give us a simple answer to why it happens. Instead, the story shows us how human explanations for suffering often fall short. Instead, it invites us to trust God, who sees everything from a much bigger, heavenly perspective. And we're only going to touch on a little bit of the story, but if you want to find out more about it, I encourage you to maybe watch the Bible Project video on the book of Job. It's fantastic, and it outlines the big picture of the book and goes into some really helpful details to help us understand what it's all about. So go and check that out if you want to. But today, we're just going to look at the part of the story where Job is in the middle of his suffering and all this bad stuff's happening to him, and then three friends come to visit him. And you might be thinking, fantastic, three friends coming along. Well, let's see how they do at looking out for Job and listening to him. So there's this guy called Job, right? And he loved God. He always tried to do what was right. But one day, Job's life got really hard. He lost his animals because he was a farmer. He had loads of animals. He lost his home. and even his children. Job got very sick himself too, and he didn't understand why all these bad things were happening to him. He was like, why is this happening to me? I've always tried to do what's right. God, are you even still there? And then 3 of Job's friends came to visit him. Their names were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And at first, they just sat with Job quietly. And that was really kind. But then they opened their mouths. Eliphaz said something like, Job, maybe this is happening because you did something wrong. Then Bildad chimes in too. He's like, yeah, God always punishes bad people. You must have sinned. It's a bit harsh, isn't it? And then Zophar joins in. He's like, you should say sorry to God. Then maybe he'll make things better. That wasn't very kind things to say, was it? And Job had to listen to this for ages. This was going on and on and on for chapters and chapters of this book of Job. And Job is confused and upset and is feeling hurt by his friends. He says, but I haven't done anything wrong. I don't understand. I just want to talk to God. Job's friends thought they were helping, but really they were just making things worse, weren't they? They didn't understand that Job was hurting, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. Job gets pretty fed up with them, and he says to them, you are terrible comforters. You're not helping at all. And then later, God speaks to Job, and guess what? God said Job was right. And the friends, they were wrong. God said, Job, you spoke honestly, but you, his friends, did not speak the truth about God. In the end, God helped Job. He healed him, he gave him back even more than he had before. And Job learned that God is always wise, even when life doesn't make sense. And Job's friends, well, they had to say sorry as well. It's quite a crazy story, isn't it? There's a lot going on there. And you can read about it in the book of Job. That's a lot of chapters that we've just covered in a short space of time. There's a lot of back and forth between Job and his friends. You see, Job's friends, they really mostly show us what not to do in terms of listening. But they do start well. Do you remember? They just came along and they just sat quietly with Job. It says in Job chapter 2, verse 13, it says, they sat with him and no one said a word. And that's the first important thing for us to learn. It's actually, that's a good thing to do, is to just sit quietly with people when we're listening to them, when they're struggling and they're maybe pouring out their heart to us, just to sit with them and be there with them. But then the problem came when his friends opened their mouths and they started saying stuff. Their words caused harm, not healing. And in fact, Job tells them off, doesn't he? And he says to them in Job chapter 16, verses 2 to 3, he says, I've heard all this before. What miserable comforters you are. When you ever stop blowing hot air, what makes you keep on talking? I think he'd much rather they just sat quietly with him for a bit longer, really. He exposes the failure of his friends to try and bring comfort. Their theology offered no room for innocent suffering. Job wasn't suffering because he'd done anything wrong. I'm sure Job wasn't completely perfect, but he certainly wasn't suffering because of his sin. And that's what his friends were trying to say. But he gets fed up with their rambling and attempts to explain why all this is happening. They're blaming him for his suffering and spiritualizing it. They're more concerned about getting their points across than listening to Job. Maybe that's a lesson for us to learn. As we listen to people, let's be more concerned with listening and caring than what we have to say and what our points are. Because then later we see that God rebukes the friends for misrepresenting him. sometimes when we listen to people, I wonder if we can be tempted to try and explain their suffering away and say, well, it's because of this and that. You should have made this decision instead of this one. Or, oh yeah, that was a stupid thing to do, wasn't it? I was like, whoa, let's not go there. Instead, let's just be kind and listen to them well. So that's sort of what not to do, right? But I think maybe there's some good stuff that we can learn from Jesus. You see, Jesus loved God perfectly and loved people perfectly. And so we want to learn from him. You see, Jesus listens differently. He listened differently to those three friends. And I've got 3 items to help us think about how Jesus listened differently and how we can listen a bit more like Jesus. And the first one is this. I wonder if you know what this is. This is a magnifying glass. What does a magnifying glass do? Well, it makes things bigger, but it's really to help us focus on the thing in front of us. It's not for lots of things. I can't really see anything when I look at stuff like that. But if I look close up at this little memory card, then I can read the teeny tiny writing on it like that. It helps me focus on the thing in front of me. You see, Jesus always gave his full attention to the person in front of him. He was never rushing people or trying to very quickly fix them and sort out what's going on. He listened to understand, to have compassion on them, not just to respond and fix the problem. We see this in the story of the lady who had been poorly for 12 years. Jesus was off to go and heal someone else, and then there's a big crowd bustling around him, pushing and shoving, and this woman just quietly sneaks through the crowd to touch Jesus's robe. And she just touches it, hoping with faith that she might be healed. And Jesus stops what's going on, and he says, "Who's touched me?" And everyone's like, "What are you on about? Everyone's touching you. What's going on?" He's like, No. Someone came to touch me to receive healing. I felt my power go out of me." And the woman comes forward and he says, "Woman, your faith has made you well." He stopped everything that was going on. He wasn't in a hurry to move past this woman. Instead, he gave her his full attention. He cared for her. He wanted to slow down enough to show this lady that he cared for her. I want to encourage us, focus on the person around us, the person in front of us. It can be so easy to be distracted by everything that's going on, the busyness of life, and rushing on to the next thing that we need to get accomplished and do. But instead, hey, remember a magnifying glass. Focus on the one thing in front of you, the one person in front of you, that they might experience your care and love. So that's the first thing, okay? A magnifying glass. Give your full attention to the person in front of you. The next way that we can listen like Jesus is with one of these. This is a giant question mark. Jesus seemed to ask more questions than he answered, which is bizarre, isn't it? Because Jesus knew a lot of stuff. And yet he seemed to ask more questions in order to draw out of people stuff that they were maybe hiding deeper down. He didn't want to shut them down. Instead, he asked questions to help them open up. We see this in the story of the blind beggar who was just there on the street and he was crying out for help. He needed someone to help him. And Jesus stops and asks him a question. He says, "What is it you want?" And this question showed compassion. He didn't assume to know what the blind beggar needed. Instead, he asked him what he wanted. And in doing that, Jesus opened up a way again to bring healing to this man. And he goes away with his sight restored. So in your conversations, as you're listening to people, I encourage you, use questions, ask good questions so that you can better understand what's going on for the person that you're talking to. How are they doing? What's really going on under the surface? Or how did that affect how they felt in that moment? It's really important that we don't just shut down what they're trying to say, but instead ask questions to open up, to help them even to explore how they're feeling and how they're doing in a certain situation. So that's the second one. Use good questions. So we've got a magnifying glass to help us focus on the person in front of us. We've got questions to help us better understand what they're going through. And then the third thing is one of these. That's a funny thing to see, isn't it? It's a mirror. Don't know what you can see over there, but it's a mirror. And what does a mirror do? It reflects something. And when we're listening to people, we can reflect back to them what they're saying by maybe sort of summarizing what they've just said using some of their own words. And that's a really helpful tool when we're listening to people, because it helps them to see that we have actually understood what they're saying. We've not understood it wrong. And that can help them to see that we really do care and that we really are listening. It also, reflecting back to them, it can also help them to hear their own words, which sometimes when you're saying stuff, you're sort of processing as you're talking. And so as you say something out loud, you might not necessarily mean it quite like you've said it. So as we reflect back to them, it gives them an opportunity to hear what they've just said, which they might be like, oh, yeah, no, I didn't quite mean it like that. Oh, I didn't quite mean it that strongly. And that can be a really helpful tool. But there's another reason why a mirror is helpful for when we're listening. And that is because we, as we listen well, can become a reflection of God's caring, gentle presence. You see, when we look at Jesus, there's this beautiful story in John chapter 11, when Jesus goes to visit his friends Mary and Martha just after their brother Lazarus has died. And he gets there and he's chatting to Mary, and she's obviously really upset. And it says this in John 11 verses 33 to 35. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Then he has the shortest verse in the Bible. It says, Jesus wept. He comes along, and in that moment, he doesn't try and give answers and answer all the questions she's got and fix all the problems. Instead, he joins her in her pain. And that's what God has done for all of us through Jesus. When Jesus came from heaven to earth, he came to be with us in our brokenness, in our sadness, in our pain. He came to be with us. The complicated word is incarnation. It's the incarnation, how God became human and became a man and walked with us on earth. And so as we are with people in their pain and in their sadness, we don't necessarily have to have all the answers. In fact, actually just being present with them can be enough to help them. And that reflects what God has done for us. So we get to reflect God to those that we listen to. Isn't that beautiful? I want to encourage you, you don't have to have all the answers in order to listen really well. Just being present is an amazing way to help people. The Bible tells us in Romans chapter 12, verse 15, it says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. You see that the power of presence, of being with people, is phenomenal. We're encouraged, rejoice with those that rejoice, right? So we have to be there with them, to celebrate with them, to celebrate the good things that's going on. Fantastic way to love people well, to listen to them well, celebrate what's going on with them. And then mourn with those that mourn. Be sad with them. You can't be sad with someone if you're far away from them through a text or whatever. Actually being with them, to listen well, just by being present with them, can make a massive difference in their life, in helping them to process their emotions and understand things well. Sometimes it's enough to just say, I hear you, that sounds really hard. I'm here for you. Maybe just putting an arm around their shoulder or whatever it is to just encourage them and be there for them. I've heard it said as well, people don't care what you know until they see that you care. People don't care what you know until they see that you care. And so let's show people that we care for them by listening well before we try and offer them our advice and big ideas and understanding the situation that's going on. And by doing that, we can be a reflection of God's love for them. Isn't that a beautiful image? I love it. So those are three ways that we can listen a bit more like Jesus. A magnifying glass to help us focus on the person in front of us. A question mark to remind us to ask good questions to help them to open up and draw out of them the stuff that's really inside. And then thirdly, a mirror. Reflect back to them what's going on and reflect what Jesus is really like to them. Let me just pray to finish off, shall we? Jesus, we thank you that you care for us so deeply, that you came to be with us. You came to show us you care by showing us your presence. We pray, Father God, that you would help us to learn to love each other well by listening well to each other. Help us to have patience, to not rush on, to focus on the person in front of us. Give us wisdom to ask the right questions to draw out of people the stuff that's going on with them. And please help us to reflect your love, to show people that you are present with them, even in the middle of their pain and suffering. Thank you that you are always with us and you always care for us. Amen.